Okay, we're back. So yeah, it is going to be important for you to learn someone's gender, especially if you want to be intimate with them, etc., and it's important to them, etc. But I don't think it's something that needs to be on the tip of our tongue all the time. Like, what gender are you? What gender are you? Um, and so yeah, that we've been trained to answer that question, and so that's gonna and then the problem that makes it really hard for people raised that way to figure people out is that they've actually combined gender and biology into one variable. So, for example, let's take something simple like the size of your bedroom. And let's say it is 3 meters wide and um, let's say 10 meters long. So you got like a nice big bedroom. You can have a couch in there, whatever you want. 3 meters by 10 meters, like, it's cool. So, like, let's take those two pieces of information and combine them into one variable by going to meters squared. So we'll multiply them together, and so now we have an answer of 30 meters squared. And like, now we've actually lost information in a way because you don't know exactly how wide or long the room was anymore. Like, you don't know, was it like 1 meter wide and 30 meters long? Probably not. 2 meters wide and 15 meters long? Probably not. 3 meters wide and 10 meters long? I mean, it could have been. But it could also have been. Wait, how do I maths? It could also have been like. Um, wait, I really am struggling to maths right now. 3 meters long or 10? 4 meters long and 5? No, 6 meters long and 5. There we go. There's another one. It could have been 6 meters long by 5 meters wide. So the point is that you know you don't know the exact height and width, and that's kind of the problem that happens when you combine gender and biology, and you say that chromosomes or genitals or whatever else you can think of today is what tells someone what their gender is or determines what their gender is. You've now taken two things that aren't the same as meters squared, because in reality these two things should never have been put together. It's more like meters and like color. But anyway, they made people think it is one thing, and now it's very hard for people to understand trans people. Like, so yeah, um, that was that. And so yeah, and that happens to you. So let's say you are somebody who, you're either someone who wants to have a different body to the one you have, or you're someone who wants to express a different gender to the one assigned to you, or both. And either of those things can be true. Um, when you're young and society is teaching you that there's this one variable, you're going to you're gonna see that one variable as it is. And so let's say you wanted a different to express a different gender, then you're probably also going to want to express or have a different body, uh, because those two things were always connected in what you were being taught and the way you were being taught to think. And so, even amongst people who are trans, we often see people who are able to basically accept that gender isn't determined by your biology, but they still think of the two as connected. And so, that's, for example, you still have people saying, like, I've been, you know, on HRT for X many months, and, um, now I look like a real gender, whatever. So, or or the idea of passing, or etc. That is when you still thinking of those two variables as one variable, and I think that's we do need to separate the two, because it isn't how it is. There are two different pieces of information, and humans are diverse. Humans are complicated. We're unique, and so there's combinations of people that don't are not able to have an expression when you've mushed these two together. So an easy example would be me. As someone who is a woman, and I consider myself to be 100% a woman, fully woman, and but I don't consider myself to be a binary woman, and my expression is not normatively binary, because obviously I have a beard, which is traditionally considered to be a property of men, despite the fact that there are like many women who grow facial hair, even ones assigned female or assigned woman or whatever at birth. They, a lot of them also do grow facial hair, but for some reason, the society has just been like, yeah, let the men have it. Like, no, some women's bodies do that, and they should be, they have every right to allow their bodies to exist the way they are. And so there's no space for me when you've mushed these two variables together, because the fact that my biology is determining one thing means that my own determination of a different thing must be false in that view. And one way that they would like to correct that, and you see this amongst both cis people and trans people who still think of these two variables as one, that a transition will correct this anomaly. So they're against people who don't want to transition physically or whatever, because they see the body as determining one thing, and they don't want you to identify as another thing until your body is saying another thing, for example. But that's not right. These two things are separate. They should be thought of as separate. But that's why, if we are going to think of these two things as different, we should still accept the fact that people raised in a society where treated them as one thing is going to have difficulty in finding their feet here as well, and you're not going to, yeah, I'm sort of getting rambly. You're not gonna necessarily feel as if these things are separate, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So you might feel that having a different body is going to also alleviate your gender dysphoria, and you're actually correct that it will, and it's not because your body changing is what makes your gender change or more valid or anything, but rather it's because your brain was raised in an environment where that is how that was part of it. That was the they were the same to you in a part deeper than sort of our rational, logical, abstract thinking can describe. So like yeah, and I think a lot of people, even in a society where they were allowed to enact their gender of identity however they wanted, have any expression or whatever they wanted, I think a lot of them would still want to have different bodies, and I think that's totally fine as well. And maybe we need to have new words for that kind of thing, because like I rate in a society, if I was like allowed to be a woman, if everyone accepted me as a woman in society just the way I am, that I would still want a different body. But maybe the only reason I feel that way is because that, society wasn't what I was raised in, and but so we'll never know. But it doesn't really matter. Um, I just wanted to mention it so that we can have a bit of nuance around it, and so that when people are expressing things like, I want to go on HRT so I can feel more like my gender, or I want to, you know, I want to transition, or if after they've gone on HRT, transitioned or whatever, like they say, wow, I feel so much more like my gender, like that is still valid. And when I say we need to separate these concepts, I'm not saying we need to separate people's attachments. And just saying from a conceptual level, the way we see gender, we need to have it then be able to be separated and to understand that each person may have them separate or not. And we can't say to everyone, like, stop acting like they're the same thing, because for many people they might be. But even those people do need to understand that for everyone else, it might not be the same thing. And so if you're someone who feels you can't help yourself but feel like it's the same thing, that's fine, as long as you understand that's a you thing. And that for everyone else, you need to give them the option of having these things separated if they want. And so that's why you come across people who are trans who might have body dysphoria but not social dysphoria, or who might have social dysphoria but not body dysphoria. And that's because, for them, those two things aren't the same thing. For them, and it might not just be the fact that, maybe they were raised when it was the same thing, but they've just so thoroughly separated those things in their mind now that they can't put them back together again, and that they've realized that all of their dysphoria was contained on the one aspect. And some days I actually feel that way. I'm gender fluid. So on some days that is how I feel, and on other days I feel strongly that I want a different body. But it's fluidity of expression, not of identity, if that makes sense. It might not, but it's what it is. So yeah, I think what we need to do as a society is to separate the two things. So now, we all know that, so yeah, I'm sort of getting to my last few points here, but we all know that the binary is way too simple for, describing what gender is like in reality. It just totally, it's nonsensical to claim that humans are binary in our bodies or genders. But so there will need to be more complexity moving forward. It's impossible for us to keep the same amount of complexity because the amount of complexity is less than the minimum required for reality to even make sense. So we do need a little bit more of complexity, but as little as possible, because too much is going to make adoption on the mainstream much harder. So we do need to worry about mainstream adoption, because the faster that happens, the less suffering essentially it occurs. And so what some people have tried to do before when trying to add only a little bit of complexity is to say binary isn't, gender isn't binary, but it is on a line with two ends, where one end is like fully woman and one end is fully man, and then you mix the two, and then in the middle you half of each. Obviously, those people who talk this model also sometimes accept agender people, but anyway. So the problem with that is that isn't that isn't how that isn't how gender works, and that isn't really even how our bodies work. Um, our bodies roughly have like a double curve thing shape distribution, I think. But that is absolutely not the same thing as being fully one thing and fully the other on the other side. That it communicates the wrong concept. Not only that, but it sort of implies that the binary description of gender or even bodies wasn't that far off. And like, don't worry, we sort of had it right, but now we're just going to allow mixing between the two. And that erases all the gender identities that have nothing to do with masculinity or femininity. It erases things like bi-genders. It erases things like agender people, and it makes it seem like a person like me, where would I fit? Because I consider myself to be fully woman, but if you've got this scale, and people will be like, you got a beard, you must be part masculine, and but the thing is that um, gender has never been binary. It's a fabricated thing, like in reality. So when I say in reality, I mean like the material, physical existence of people and their own experiences of gender have never been binary. We've done enough experiments now to know that there isn't any correlation between a binary and real world data in both your self experience, expression, bodies, everything. Um, and that's why having a binary framework is just way too simple. It makes, you know, wait, yeah. So the problem with that is it might add a little bit of info, but it's still too simple for giving everyone space. So I would say we need to do away with that conception entirely. And yes, there might be people who do have a combination of masculinity and femininity, and they are awesome and valid and amazing people, and they're also often really attractive, which is cool. But they aren't, on a line between two genders. They're just a mixture of two, and there might be someone who's a mixture of femininity and some other gender that's not masculine or whatever, and you definitely get combinations of genders and agender. So yeah, the if what we did was to say, well, we're just separating gender from biology, and so that includes like sort of dysphoria and stuff, then people understand that they can't look at your appearance or your body and then think that they know what gender that's describing. That allows you the self-identification and allows you self-determination and agency, because now you get to say what your gender is, not your appearance. And that, I think, is super important, and it is such a simple change in my opinion as well, that it doesn't add that much complexity when you just like say, look, we thought of this as two different things. We thought of these two different things as one thing, and they're actually two. We thought gender and biology were directly connected, and they're not. So how that plays out and how people feel about gender and their bodies and all of that's going to be messy as heck. But the model is simple and big enough for that mess. And it might take us some time to settle, but if we wanted to gravitate to the line model of there's one end and in between, then that's not going to be valid for a lot of people. Whereas separating biology and gender, it is valid. Because even the people that see the two things as the same can just be like, for me individually, they're the same. And that's cool. But as a society, we know that they're not the same. that they get mixed into the same for some people, but that there are two different things. And yeah, so thinking of gender as binary is not, it's not helpful. It's an it's an ideology. It's an idea about the world, that, so I don't think identifying as binary is helpful. Um, and I know sometimes what people say is they only identify as binary because they want people to know that they are, 100% of that gender and not like NB or like a mix or whatever. And to that I would be like, well, why not just use the gender you are? Well, why not say 100% and then the gender you are? Or, because that should be enough. Like, you shouldn't need to imply the format that the gender takes, which you should know is impossible for it to take, just to have access to the gender itself. Like, if I say I'm a woman, then I'm a woman. That's who I am. I'm not part man because I didn't say I was part man. I'm not, some points in between woman and man because I didn't say that. I said I was a woman. And then if I want to make it clear, and I want to make sure 100% sure, although people still do their darndest to still make the mistake, but I tell them I'm fully a woman or I'm 100% a woman. I might have a traditionally non-binary expression, and I consider my gender to be non-binary because I can't even imagine anymore. I've been thinking about gender in a better framework for so long now that I can't even imagine how you could get to a binary gender. Like, it just doesn't make sense knowing what I know, knowing all these other genders exist. I can't imagine it. But when you combine into one variable, maybe that's how people do it. They've reduced it into such a simplistic way of thinking that they can imagine the impossible. Yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much it, and hopefully that was interesting. And I didn't 100% say what I planned, and I got carried away and rambly, but I'm just feeling kind of good about this topic in a way. Like, I'm feeling like, well, in some ways I feel bad because I feel like the entire world is going in the wrong direction. But in some ways I feel good because I've seen a lot of other people saying things similar to this, and expressing solidarity with this position. And I guess I have hope that we will adopt this kind of position, so that people like me will have a chance at integration. So yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, that's all for now. Bye.